Barbados is ripe for investment. Infrastructure, housing, renewable energy. These are high priority areas for the government of Barbados to improve the lives of Barbadians. And the government's initiatives are getting international kudos as well as backing. The International Finance Corporation has outlined plans to help Barbados achieve some of these goals. On his first official mission to Barbados in 2024, Alfonso García Mora, Vice President of the International Finance Corporation, or IFC, talks with me, Stacey Russell, about the organization's intentions. Good afternoon, Mr. Alfonso García Mora. Welcome to Barbados.
Thank you.
You are the Vice President of the International Finance Corporation, and you have responsibility for Europe, Latin America, and the Caribbean. And in this role, this is your first official mission to Barbados. How are you enjoying it so far?
Actually, thank you very much, first of all, and I'm really enjoying it. Barbados is a beautiful country. I was here many years ago when I was at the World Bank, and I always thought that it was a beautiful country with beautiful people and very nice people and very pleasant. So I was very keen to come back to Barbados and to spend a little bit of time here.
Great. What are you hoping to accomplish on this particular mission? Why did you come?
To meet the authorities and also some private sector players to see how IFC can help the country and the private sector in particular to achieve the development goals and to achieve a more inclusive and resilient growth pattern. This is one thing that we as an investment company, we try to invest on things that actually lead to development, that have a big development impact. And this is what we are trying to find opportunities here in Barbados to help the private sector to do that.
Tell us a little bit more about IFC, the International Finance Corporation. Just a little bit of background.
So the IFC is the private sector arm of the World Bank Group. We operate in all the regions in the world with 4,500 people distributed all around from Asia to the Caribbean, Argentina, Georgia, South Africa, wherever you think. And what we do is we invest in private sector companies that are trying to, or that by this investment, we can achieve a development impact or a development goal. We invest approximately $43 billion a year. And the Caribbean and Latin America. The Caribbean is one of the regions, or is the region where we invest the most, Latin America and the Caribbean.
How much are you currently investing?
We are investing in Latin America and the Caribbean close to $15 billion. Okay. And the reason is, and we mostly focus on three big areas. No? One is inclusion. So our objective is, and our strategy and our objective is to make the societies more inclusive, meaning more people with access to finance, more people with access to health, more people with access to education, to digital services, to anything that you might think can really make a society more inclusive. Second, we invest on climate resilience, because this is a big thing that we really believe is going to affect absolutely every single citizen and company in the world in the coming years. And we are trying both to help countries to mitigate the impact of climate change by changing the energy mix, and also societies to adapt to whatever is going to happen with climate, or the impact that climate change is going to have. No matter how many degrees we will be above what should be, where we should be, that the climate change is having a huge impact on the citizens and the population. So we are trying to help them to prepare for that. And the third part is productivity. We try to make the economies more productive, so that actually when you think about it, is a way of making growth more productive and therefore more inclusive.
What are you currently doing in Barbados? And by you, I mean the IFC.
Yeah. Barbados, we are currently working on two important projects, and we are also exploring many others. No? The ones that we are working are a Lambert project, which is a project on onshore wind, so renewable energy with wind energy. This is something that is where IFC has a lot of experience globally in many regions as well, and we saw the opportunity to help Barbados and the energy sector to move into that direction and to continue changing the energy mix towards a much cleaner energy mix. No? We are also investing in a hydrogen project to really try to find new sources of energy in the country. No? But we are exploring many other opportunities, no? Which is where I think what I wanted to discuss with the authorities and with the private sector. No? Opportunities that goes from thinking on how we can use instruments like public-private partnerships, which brings together the public and the private sector to finance infrastructure that is very much needed, no? Either for climate or for other objectives. No? And we are exploring different PPPs in the country. No? Something that we are also doing in other countries in the Caribbean, like for instance in Jamaica, no? Where we are financing roads, we are financing broadband network, we are exploring to finance hospitals, etc. So it's not only for core infrastructure, but also for social infrastructure.
So you've just mentioned this public-private partnership in relation to this large-scale wind farm that is going to be onshore. It's going to be in the north of our island in Lamberts in St. Lucie. Tell me a little bit more about how that is going to work. I know that the IFC and our government have already signed the papers to make this happen. When is it likely to come on stream?
Well, talking about timing is not easy because it depends on many different factors. No? The idea is that this onshore wind will provide or will generate a significant amount of energy, megabytes, that will help again to substitute, to replace the fossil fuels energy by onshore wind, no? by wind energy.
So I believe you're looking at a generation of between 30 to 50 megawatts. And this is going to be, what will that mean for Barbadians?
So what it means, I mean, in the big scheme of things, is not that you are going to change dramatically in the energy mix, but it's a good step in the right direction. Remember that the Barbados has agreed or has committed to have 95% of renewable energy by 2030. This is a very high percentage. And in order to go there, you really need to start creating or signaling how to do that, signaling the path. This is a little bit what we are trying to do. By this investment, what we are trying is to show to the world that this is bankable, that this is an opportunity, that the opportunity is here, and that we are, as IFC, as the first the financial institution investing in the private sector in developing markets, investing in Barbados to achieve it. So after this, we hope that other opportunities related to onshore wind, but also offshore wind or solar energy will also come to continue and to complementing this type of investment to achieve that 95% objective.
How is the IFC going to garner that funding to get it up and running?
Well, IFC has its own balance sheet, so we invest directly, but we also mobilize others to invest. But in this case, being a private-public partnership, what we try is to also, so IFC does something that is probably the most important value added of our investments, which is the due diligence of our environmental and social safeguards. So basically, any single operation that we do, or investment that we do, or that we advise, the borrower has to comply with our standards. The standards that IFC has are, I would say, best practices in the world. So basically what we help borrowers and projects is to comply with these standards. And by complying with these standards, this is a good signal for the market to say, okay, there is a project that IFC has done the due diligence, that IFC has prepared, is ready for or for investment from international investors. No?
So you will be brokering a deal, so to speak, with an international private sector investor.
Exactly.
It's not that IFC will necessarily be putting all of the money into this.
No.
And this investment could be up to $80 million?
Well, yes, that's it depends. I mean, there are still things to be solved, but could be.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. And why is private sector investment so integral to development?
So what?
Integral, so
Yeah, that's a very good
important
question.
for
And look,
development.
I'm going to give you one figure that probably explains the reason. So what we need in developing economies is around $2.8 trillion of investment per year until 2030 to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals related to climate. 2.8 trillion. What we are investing today is 700 million. So we are not covering, and you do your math, no? but approximately less than 20% of what is needed. No? And the problem is, how can we catch up? How can we close that gap between what is needed in order to make sure that we can comply with the SDGs and the climate objectives and what we have today? There is no fiscal space in governments. So the governments will have, countries will have to increase taxes up to the sky, and not even then will be able to finance all this amount of money.
And the citizens don't want to hear
And
that.
the citizens will not want to hear about that. Or they will need to replace other social expenditures to invest in renewable energy or to invest in climate-friendly projects, which society will not like that either. No? So we need to find other ways to close that gap. And what we believe is that at least 2/3 of this 2.8 trillion needs to come from the private sector. Now, the private sector is financing $150 billion a year, 150 billion out of the 700 that the world is financing. 150 billion compares to the 2.8 trillions that are needed. So look at the gap. It's absolutely huge. No? And that's why the private sector is very much needed, and that's why IFC is an institution that is needed to close that gap, or that we believe is needed with other multilateral development banks. So basically, the reason is, the challenge is huge. Public sector cannot finance it because there is no fiscal space for that. All the governments in the world will be bankrupted if they try to do that. Or taxes will have to raise like crazy. That will not be possible. Therefore, we need to mobilize private capital. There are $400 trillion in institutional investors around the world. $400 trillion assets under management within institutional investors. The issue is, how can we mobilize a little bit of those trillions that exist in the world to finance this type of investments? Because when I look at the numbers, it doesn't look like that much. Well, it's a lot, but there is money in the world. There is liquidity in the world. The issue is, how can we channel that liquidity towards this type of projects? No?
How do you answer your own question?
And that's where IFC tries to help, which is basically what we try is to make projects bankable, meaning attractive for these investors, compliant with the international best practices. So in terms of environmental standards, social standards, governance standards, they need to comply with what these investors are willing to and can invest in, and that's a role that IFC play. IFC will not be able to close that gap financing. No, it's impossible. We don't have the capacity, financial capacity to do that. We have the capacity to mobilize others to bring that crowd in or to bring that money to finance that gap.
We'll be right back on how the International Finance Corporation is positioning Barbados to investors. How far have you got in terms of trying to convince, whether it be one or a group of investors, to invest in that project at Lambert's?
So we are not there yet, and that will come in due time during the project process. But I mean, historically we have been quite successful. We are working on renewable energy, maybe half a hundred. More than 50 countries in the world doing exactly the same role. So we know where to go, and they know us, which is more important than knowing where to go.
What is the process for this particular project to get these investors on board?
Well, first we have to finalize the design, the structure, and then we will need to open for competitive auctions, and the project will come.
Now, when you look at Barbados, What do we have going for us that would be attractive to investors?
So I think that's why you have to make the project bankable, meaning that is attractive financially. You will not bring investors if the project financially is not attractive for them, even if the final social or developmental impact is there. These investors, at the end of the day, what they are representing are pensioners or depositors, etc., living in other places. So they would like to make sure that their savings have a return. So you need to structure the project here in a way that you guarantee that return for those savers in a way. No? So that's what we do. We try to structure the project to help the government and the sponsor to structure the project in a way that is attractive for this international capital. No? And then it will, hopefully, will come. They know us, they know that if they comply with our due diligence, they comply with international best practices, and therefore they will feel attractive. What else can, because you may think, why an international investor is going to come to Barbados instead of going to Brazil, or going to Colombia, or going to Mexico?
That's what I meant.
And what I would say is,
what's so special about us?
Well, there are many things that are special,
seen,
but
based on what are you likely to be saying to investors about Barbados?
So everybody wants to have a diversified portfolio, first of all, and Barbados gives diversification. Second, Barbados is a stable market with very stable governance, rule of law, and a country that is, let me call it, secure to invest. So it's a country that can be attractive. It is true that maybe the investment is not the size of an investment in a super large country, but not every investor just invests in super large investments. No? I think that the diversification of different investments is also an objective of many of these investors. No?
So we'll be going towards achieving being carbon neutral by 2030. We'll be improving on our energy mix. Does this mean that we're likely to be paying less for energy with a project like this coming on stream?
It depends on how do we define paying less. And this is not a rhetoric question. It's a little bit rhetoric, but let me explain you why.
Dollars and cents.
No, what I'm saying is, at the end of the day, depending on how do we price it. So if we don't do it, independently of how much you pay for the electricity that you consume at home, that I don't think will be more expensive. What is true is that will make the world more sustainable and the country more sustainable and resilient. So if you internalize that cost, definitely will be cheaper. If you ask me about the bill that I will have to pay on a daily basis, it depends on many things that will happen from now until 2030. And I'm going to give you one example. Solar energy, in 2012, the megabyte of production generation of solar energy was by far much more expensive than any other comparator source of energy. Many people were saying, no, this is not going to fly. This is impossible. We will never have unless there are huge subsidies right and left, this will not be internalized in the day-to-day of a society. Today, the unit cost or the megabyte cost of the solar energy is by far much cheaper than many other, if not all, sources of energy. So my point is that the technology is evolving super fast. Renewable energy is becoming more and more and more, or cheaper and cheaper and cheaper, and more sustainable. So we have to include both things. And at the end of the day, imagine that you take me to a position in which you say, Alfonso, you know what? The price of the bill might increase by 10%. If we go to a full 100% renewable energy, I would say, okay, I can absorb that. The society should be ready to absorb that increase in price. Because how much will it represent in your total, I would say, consumption basket? Not that much, if you think about it. It is true that for the poorer people or poorest people, it might represent much more, but you have other instruments to compensate or to help them to compensate for that increase in energy. But this increase in energy will make the world much more resilient and sustainable. So a 10% in your consumption basket increase, and this is just a hypothetical talk, will be not even when you think about how much the energy bill represents in your monthly expenditures, it is insignificant compared to many other expenses that you have. So a 10% increase out of this bill will really not be a deal breaker in my view compared to the general benefit that it will create.
Okay, fair enough. I'm going to ask one more thing about that particular project that is built for Lambert's in St. Lucie. Now, as you've just pointed out, so many benefits will be coming out of it, but what about the residents who will be living nearby where it's to be located? How is it likely to affect them?
So that's part of our due diligence and our structure. And we have performance standards in IFC that make sure that everybody is consulted, that make sure that it does not have any negative impact on the population, on the society that is living around the park. I mean, I'm coming from a country, from Spain, where you see wind parks every single province, every single place. And you can do it in a way that is not distortive. You are not going to put the windmills close to the house of a citizen. There are ways in which you can do it, ring-fencing the well-being of the society.
How much land is it supposed to be occupying?
I don't know.
When we come back, more about how public-private partnerships can invigorate social development in Barbados. Now, you mentioned a hydro project as well that you're interested in. Tell me a little bit more about that.
So this is a very innovative project, which is trying to, it's like the new technology of green hydrogen and trying to really get energy of hydrogen instead of using the traditional sources of energy. This is an investment that we are still exploring, that we have already some support from the Global Climate Fund, and that, in my view, if we finally agree on some issues that are more a negotiation thing, will be also an interesting project for the country that will go again on the same direction of making the energy mix of the country more resilient and more sustainable.
What other prospects do you see in Barbados where public-private partnerships are concerned?
You know, I think I see at least 2 or 3 areas where we could think on PPPs. One is all related to social infrastructure. So thinking on schools, thinking on hospitals, where building the infrastructure is costly. It doesn't affect who will run the hospital afterwards or the school. There are many countries that are building hospitals with PPPs, and then they run it either public hospital or private hospitals. That's perfectly fine, but helps you to finance and to upgrade all the social infrastructure, in this case thinking on the schools and hospitals, to the best level. No? So this is an area where we are working in some Central American countries, and I believe that there are opportunities in Barbados that we could explore. Another area that I think is very, that will happen is related to the port. We will see, but that could be another area that is interesting. But when you think about PPPs, to me the most important thing is not, so this is an instrument, it's not an objective itself. It's a way, a mean to achieve objectives. Meaning, a PPP is a way of financing things.
Yes.
And you can use it for whatever you want. The only thing that you really need to have is a good PPP framework that exists in the country. What you need to have is the willingness from both parts, the public sector and the private sector, to co-finance it, so that the private sector, as I say many times, there are some things that are too risky for the private sector to do alone, and too costly for the public sector to do alone. So you can have a mix and you can structure it in a way that the public sector can de-risk the project and therefore attract the private capital, in addition to the know-how from the private sector that is going to do it. So that's the combination that I believe it has a lot of potential in the country and in the Caribbean in general.
And do you think that, this is feeding off of what you were just saying, do you think that it's always important for a government to retain the majority ownership in a project, or it's okay to allow private sector to lead the way, so to speak?
So normally it depends on it depends. One thing is depending on what you are doing. No? So if the thing is the infrastructure, the social infrastructure, for instance, a hospital, you can construct the hospital with a PPP, and then you can decide who do you want to manage the hospital or own the hospital, if the public sector or the private sector. There are reasons for both, and there are cases where you will need a mix of both. So it is independent, the way that you finance it with the way that you manage it. You don't need to really make a link of the two. There are some sectors where bringing private expertise and actually, let me call it privatizing or making it private sector led, makes the investment, or you can bring the know-how from the private sector as well. There are some things that you might need to bring the private sector know-how to manage the infrastructure, because you don't have experiences doing that, or you don't have that expertise in the country that can manage that. But you can do it independently of how you have financed the infrastructure.
Don't go away. When we come back, suggestions for strengthening the island's biggest income sector, tourism. So let's talk a little bit now about development. And we're considering Barbados, of course. We're also looking at the rest of the Caribbean, Latin America. What are you seeing? What's required? I know that you're also responsible for operationalizing the post-COVID-19 response in relation to what you do in your job. What does Barbados need to be doing as we come out the other side of the pandemic, for instance?
So if I have to think on two things, to simplify my response, because the question is very broad and will require hours of conversation. But if I will have to simplify, I would say we need to make sure that we have a more resilient economy and country. What is coming from the climate change is huge. We have already suffered that. We have seen in some countries in the Caribbean that when a hurricane strikes, it can blow up 1 year of GDP, or even one more year, more than a year of GDP. No? So we need to have, as resilient as we can, the infrastructure of a country, meaning houses, meaning productive sectors, meaning many things that actually, and to provide countries with the capacity and financial instruments to deal with these shocks when they happen. This is one thing. But if you think about, okay, let's take that out of the table for a moment and think what else can be done. What should be the priorities? Tourism represents 30% of the GDP in the Caribbean and also in Barbados. And more than 30% of jobs are in the tourism sector. So we need to think how to upscale and continue growing and improving the tourism sector.
What opportunities do you see?
For instance, trying to make more internal tourism or local, how to make sure that the tourism that comes to the Barbados stay in Barbados, live forex in Barbados, goes to the restaurants in Barbados, go to the sightseeing in Barbados. So avoid the tour operators, traditional tour operators coming and they just go for a walk, they come back to the ferry and they leave. There are not much value added from that type of tourism. It is okay, but there are ways in which you can upgrade that to a tourism that really enjoys more what the island can really provide to the tourists. No? And there are good examples of that. I think that Costa Rica, for instance, is a country that actually has made tourism also one of the main drivers of the GDP in that country, and where there are lots of activities within the country that actually attracts people to stay in the country for a while, no? and to enjoy. So I think that the thinking, this is one thing, but the second is related to tourism, continue making the tourism infrastructure as sustainable as possible. So we can really embrace the green tourism, the sustainable tourism. So hotels that are much more efficient in terms of use of energy, in terms of use of water, in terms of linkages with the environment and the places in which they are. So there is a huge agenda around the sustainable tourism that I think that Barbados can perfectly find or perfectly well embrace. No? So this is one thing related to the tourism, because it's the main productive sector in the economy. But second is the diversification of the economy, and this is very important. So I also come from a country, I said before, Spain, that is also very focused on tourism. And it is important to diversify. You cannot have all the eggs on the same basket, because then there are shocks that can actually destroy completely your economy, no? Either a climate shock, or either a pandemic shock, or either any other shock. So it is very important to diversify the economy, the sources of growth. No? And I think that there is one that actually is super interesting to think about Barbados, which is the agro processing. This is a sector that, you know, at the end of the day, Barbados is very close to Guyana, it's very close to Trinidad, it's very close to the Amazonia, and could be a logistic hub to really work or to really transmit or transfer or pass through all these agri products, produce them or transform them here, and then export to the rest of the world. No?
Well, this is something that our government is actually already pursuing, so it's good to hear from
I think it's an
that
excellent
you're on
idea.
board with that.
It's an excellent idea, and actually Barbados has a lot of potential to play a key role there.
Now, when we consider, again, we're going back to development, so we've considered challenges in relation to climate, pandemic. We've lived through some of them. What are the opportunities that you're seeing now for Barbados?
Well, this is one of, two opportunities that are very clear. One is this one, the geographical location, what the Prime Minister and the authorities of Barbados have it very clear. No? Barbados is placed in a place of the map where you have that comparative advantage. But we have to put it in value. We have to use Barbados as the logistic hub for all this agro-processing. And I think that there is a huge potential there. They require investments, and that's why we are here, to really help and show our willingness to help the country moving in that direction. But the second thing is digitalization,
yes,
which is a big opportunity as well. A big opportunity because at the end of the day, digitalization allows you to reduce big time all the fixed costs that you need with the traditional incumbents, no? From banking to retail business, to anything that you might think, even health services, education, everything. So we really need to make sure that access to broadband and access to fast internet is spread all around the island, and everybody has access to it, because it will help us to be much more productive and much more efficient. No?
Okay, so how do you see digitalization being transferred into some other things that perhaps we're already doing well at, whether it be transportation, whether it be construction, whether it be this push that we're on to make the operations of some government departments more efficient? What else do you want to add in that regard?
Look, we did a study that is quite interesting. 70% of the SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals, are linked to digitalization, or will be improved by using digital means. 70%. So I'm telling you this because what I'm trying to explain is that absolutely everything is subject to digital impact or digital improvements. No? We have complied only with 15% of the SDGs so far, 15% of the targets that we had. And there is not too much time until 2030. No? Digitalization can help us to really move much faster than what we have been doing in the past. No? And I'm going to give you, to me, the clear example is digital financial services, no? Because it's probably one of the easiest, or the one that actually has evolved more, no? Digital payments. Today, and 10 years ago is day and night. How people use digital finance, how people can do payments, can have access to payments or pay in a store, or do a transfer, or do whatever they want to do with their finances. No? 10 years ago, that would have been impossible. You needed to go to the local branch, do the line, stay half an hour, and then do your financial. Imagine the amount of time that it has saved for every single citizen to do many other things.
But then how do we address the challenges related to that? For instance, cybersecurity.
Working on it. So we need to have a strong regulatory framework, first of all. We need to have a strong supervisor, and we need to have a very clear and very strong as well data privacy regulation, so that all the potential risks are managed. But these are risks, and as I like to say, risks are there to be managed, not to be avoided.
Well, you know, it's been said that the Caribbean is a big target right now where it comes to cybersecurity or insecurity. How are we supposed to manage this risk?
Well, I think, I mean, there are many different pieces, no? But of course, first of all, as I said before, you need a very strong regulatory framework. You need a telecom regulatory framework that is strong, so that you can make sure that actually the use of the data is the right one, and you are protected. You need to have a very clear consumer protection legislation as well. And on the financial sector side, you need to have a supervisor that supervises the banks in a way that you preserve the protection of the consumers and investors.
When we come back, Mr. Garcia Mora's impressions of government's Hope Housing Project. Now, as we wrap up, I want to touch just on two things, and this has to do with small businesses and startups. I know that you're generally seemingly targeting large investors in terms of getting on board with, for instance, a PPP. Mm-hmm. But what do small businesses who are now starting out, can look forward to in terms of help from your organization?
So, we don't work directly with the small businesses because we can't, because of the size of IFC, but we work with SMEs and micro MSMEs through financial institutions. So we lend to financial institutions with the condition that they need to use this capital and this financing to lend to small enterprises and to micro enterprises. And we do that particularly for gender, for women. And actually one of our flagship programs in Latin America is women MSMEs and entrepreneurs. So we lend to banks whatever amount of money, or we give them a risk-sharing facility, so we take part of the risk with the condition that that money needs to go to women-led MSMEs, which are the ones that are clearly more excluded from the access to finance in the world. No?
Lastly, I know that you had a look at our Hope project today, I believe it was, that you had a look at it. This is our housing project that's coming on stream that is going to be energy efficient in terms of the types of homes that are being built, and they're going to be strong to really withstand hurricanes and so forth. What were your impressions?
Fantastic. It's beautiful. Actually, I asked if I could qualify, but I don't. No, but seriously, I think it's a great initiative. I mean, the idea is very good, and you know, the good thing of Hope as well is that you can replicate easily the project, and you can also scale the size and the type of construction that you do, so that you can really tailor or make it even more and more affordable for those that are in most need. No? But the link between the housing finance and the energy generation, I think is a great idea.
But you know, this is a government project. How do you see this being able to be replicated with private sector investment, but still keeping the cost low for especially people who are now going to own homes for the first time?
Well, at the end of the day, everybody that will have access to one of these houses will have to ask for a mortgage to a commercial bank. So what the government is doing is financing the land, the acquisition of the land. but the construction and the final user or buyer of the house has to be done like any other household in the world. No? But there is one thing that is very important, is how to use the generation of energy to produce more energy than the one that probably the house needs, and therefore to sell it to the grid. And that will help you to finance part of it.
Well, I must thank you for making time for us today. I'm going to give you an opportunity to tell me anything else that you wanted to share today before you go.
That's a very attractive proposition, but no. Let me just close saying that I'm very happy to be here in Barbados. I think that there are huge opportunities that this country and the Caribbean has. You see the tone of the conversations, the anger and the willingness of the society to move and to prosper and to go to the next level. And I think that with the passion and the clear minds of the authorities and the private sector, together with the willingness of the society to progress, you will be one of hopefully our stars countries in the coming years. So really looking forward to it.
Well, thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Alfonso García Mora, Vice President of Europe, Latin America and the Caribbean at the International Finance Corporation. Thank you.
Thank you.